Your Excellency, this year we invited two speakers and our keynote speaker today is Professor Christiaan. She's a professor of law and education at ITI Catholic University and also the president of the International Catholic Legislators Network in the world. And I normally refer to him as the ruminant of some of the good things in Europe now. Professor, you are very welcome. He traveled with his son, who is somewhere. I don't know whether he managed to go through. He is there. And he's studying law at Amsterdam. Professor, you are very welcome to speak to us. Let's put our hands together to welcome Professor.
How is it possible for me, after Bishop Masinde, Honorable Norbert, and this beautiful talent, to still add something? So I will humbly try to add some words to all the wisdom and testimony I have heard today. Your Excellency, Mr. President of the Republic, and the First Lady, I heard lovingly being called Mama Janet. This is clearly an Ugandan tradition, so maybe I also humbly request to have that privilege to call the First Lady Mama Janet, as you all do. What a beautiful tradition, because it shows that nations fall and stand, or I would say are built up through mothers, through motherhood. Please never forget that, my Ugandan friends. It's motherhood that builds our nations. I come from a big family, and I'm a father of a family, so I know. So Your Excellency, once again, Mr. President, I also greet Her Excellency the Vice President, the Right Honorable Prime Minister, the Honorable Chief Justice, the Right Honorable Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Members of Parliament, and also the organizer, Honorable Minister David Bahati, who has been so kindly guiding me, Honorable Members of Parliament, esteemed dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen. What a great honor and privilege it is for me to stand here before you today in this country that is rightly called a pearl, or I should correct myself, the pearl of Africa. At an annual event where we join to thank God for this great country and its people on the eve of its 60th Independence Day. And my first visit, when I arrived to this country a few days ago, it's my second time in Uganda, went to the shrine of the first Christian martyrs of Uganda in Namugango. I was there in 2018 and it deeply moved me, so I immediately wanted to take my son there to pay tribute to these great martyrs and to pray at their intercession. I also, it was already mentioned, went to the source of the Nile, and my son yesterday went to one of the beautiful national parks while his father had to work. This all to show you, Your Excellency and dear friends here, that we have come here to come to know this country, to come to appreciate this country. And I would also like to, at this point, specifically recognize His Excellency the President for his tireless efforts in having African countries work together to stand strong on the world stage. I will come to speak a few more words about this. I stand here today, and I want to start with that. I stand here today not representing any country, not representing any organization or ideology, but only as a person whose first identity is being a Christian, no matter what else. That is my identity. And thus, I stand here as your brother, no matter what is your creed. And I want to make that very clear at the beginning of my reflections. So I want to thank you for inviting me to speak on this beautiful text, "Let us arise and build," from the prophet Nehemiah. For the title of this address, I have added virtue education as the cornerstone of society. Now you might ask why. Because Nehemiah was a man of character who loved God and country, like is written so beautifully in the coat of arms of Uganda, for God and country. Which is why he set out to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, as, and I quote, "it lies in ruins and its gates have been gutted by fire." But he did not rebuild the physical walls of his beloved Jerusalem only. He, even more importantly, recognizing how the people were unfaithful to God, set out to rebuild the faith and to restore the covenant. Nehemiah, his work, in fact, we often forget, he was appointed by the Persian king as the provincial governor of Judea. He focused on doing what is right and just. Hence, drawing the line from then, 400 years before the birth of Christ, to now, the theme of my comments today is, "Let us arise and build virtue education as the cornerstone of society." Because as this great leader Nehemiah shows us, it was his virtuous leadership that restored Jerusalem. In today's world, every country is in need of Nehemiah's restoration work. So this morning, I would like to reflect with you on 3 topics to briefly explore how we can follow Nehemiah's example. What are virtues today? Secondly, virtues and education. And thirdly, virtues and leadership. Before delving into this, I would like to quote from a great, in fact, Christian political leader of modern times of the 20th century, who, like Nehemiah, set out to restore, to build, and to do good. His name was Dag Hammarskjöld. He was the 2nd Secretary General of the United Nations from 1953 till 1961. And he also had a deep love for the peoples of Africa. In 1953, he said, "Our work for peace must begin within the private world of each one of us. To build for man a world without fear, we must be without fear. To build a world of justice, we must be just. And how can we fight for liberty if we are not free in our own minds? How can we ask others to sacrifice if we are not ready to do so?" Really, ladies and gentlemen, I could stop here, but I won't. But this is really the core, I think, of what also Nehemiah was doing, and the core of my message today, and also to the youth when I spoke to them 2 days ago. It starts here, in my heart, in my life, in my personal decisions and my attitude, in my faith. And that is why I want to briefly speak about the virtues with you today. So what are virtues? They are moral habits that enable us to do good, also and especially in times of great difficulty, and that allow us to attain the furthest potentialities of our human nature. Nehemiah is a perfect example of what this means in daily life. Biblical scholars describe him as a truly virtuous layman whose life was ordered by a vocation that led him to prayer and action. Ora et labora, we say in the Latin tradition. It is at the heart also of the nature of the Christian life. And let me tell you, in the 15 years that I have had the privilege to work with legislators and politicians from around the world, I have been so deeply impressed by seeing especially legislators from Uganda and Kenya and Zambia and others I have met living this vocation in a way that I don't see with many legislators outside of these countries. And I ask you to continue living that. You are a testimony and an example to many. Nehemiah, we read in the Old Testament, was a man dedicated to the single purpose of the welfare of his people. He was a man of good practical sense. He was a man of deep faith in God. He was a man of selfless service. We thus find with him the following virtues that he practiced daily and that we can distill from the book of Nehemiah. It was faith, as in godliness, charity, as in compassion for the oppressed, courage, as in rebuilding despite opposition, internal and external. It was integrity of character. It was selflessness. He even, we know as Nehemiah, gave up his palace to start working with his people to rebuild the walls. It was perseverance. He kept on working even when some plotted to kill the prophet Nehemiah. And finally, it was justice for all that he lived and preached. Now, these 7 virtues were not his only moral habits, but we will concentrate on them today to understand better how these can be cornerstones of the society we are called to build and rebuild. Not only the walls and the gates, as we humans tend to focus on, but even more the inside, the hearts and the minds of ourselves and our people. The Greek statesman and orator Demosthenes, he lived also in the 4th century before Christ, in his appeal to the Athenians not to succumb to foreign rule, explains us why we have to work hard to attain these moral habits. He says to the Athenians, "Or will the day come when we awake to discover that we have ceded future liberty to current ease?" The greatest obstacle to virtue is comfort, easygoing, and mediocrity, something I always point out to my students at the university. Hence, as already the great Greek philosophers of antiquity understand so well, attaining and retaining the virtues is a daily labor, as Nehemiah showed us. Virtues, says Alexandre Havard in his classic Virtuous Leadership, are acquired through repetition that instills strength of character and stability of personality. It enhances our capacity to act right and just at all times. We cultivate virtues first and foremost to become better people, the excellence of being. I heard it in the prayers today, the struggle for our youth, That is where we have to train them in, this excellence of being. Virtues are those tools of life. Virtues are the attitude of excellence. Virtues are the unfailing moral compass, and they sustain and feed our conscience. So important in leadership. It is the virtuous life that brings the fullest potential out of a person. And we are each one of us called to live this life like Nehemiah. Because he was only able to lead himself and thus his people to arise and build because he chose to pursue the virtues and live always and act faithful to his conscience. Here I would like to take a brief moment to touch upon current affairs and how virtues go hand in hand with values. I would like to make an appeal here to you, my Ugandan brothers and sisters. Don't allow other countries outside Africa and certain NGOs and international organizations to dictate to you how you should run your families, schools, and communities. Let me simply quote the words of Pope Francis that he has so often spoken on your behalf and what should be taught. He says, agendas are increasingly dictated, he speaks here about international relations, by a mindset that rejects the natural foundations of humanity and the cultural roots that constitute the identity of many peoples. As I have stated on other occasions, I consider this a form of ideological colonization. End of the quote of Pope Francis. He calls this the new colonialism. I humbly suggest to all of you, my African friends, my Ugandan friends especially, show moral leadership by staying true to your unique identity and principles. Arise, Uganda. To my European and North American friends, I appeal, as you preach tolerance in the West and beyond, please also be respectful of the life, family, and social values of our African brothers and sisters. Let us not impose, but encounter, as I have had the great privilege to be doing in the 15 years of working with legislators, and many of them African legislators. I would like to come to my second point, speaking briefly about virtues and education. And I'm so happy that First Lady Mama Janet has joined us again in her function also as Minister of Education. Education is at the heart of my professional life. Virtues and education go together, and they can and will change the course of a nation, because this is what it does. When we not only educate our young people well, but also educate them to live the virtuous life, we teach them to be magnanimous. Magnanimity is the quest of the Spirit for great things. It is the habit that seeks to serve a purpose that is larger than oneself. It thus equally requires humility to know oneself and one's place. We want to be part of something greater than ourselves, something we can be proud of. And my goodness, do you Ugandans have a lot to be proud of. And we want to come out of the process as different and better people than we were when we went in. We want to be men, not boys. We want to be women, not girls. So, this is the place that virtue education has in our lives. And Nehemiah could only rebuild Jerusalem because he paid much attention to the cornerstones of the new walls, being bringing back the people to the covenant, which is today, in today's setting, we could call the catalogue of virtues. So if we truly want to restore our nations, as Nehemiah did, we need to begin by instilling the virtues into the young, by first our own example, and then the educational efforts we undertake, schools, universities, and especially the family. Fight for the family. It is what society is built on, and societies, countries, nations can only survive when families are strong and intact. But there's also another aspect here where these virtues are built, and that is in solid institutions. As we have seen throughout history, when countries go through crises, whether or not they come out stronger or weaker often depends on whether or not these countries had solid institutions rooted in civil society and representing its virtues and values. If the state respects and encourages these institutions, for example, churches, schools, and local structures, where the youth can be educated in the virtues and traditions of the country, it will also be better able to cope when crises, whether political, economical, or otherwise, occur. I was deeply impressed these days going through Uganda, and the people accompanying me telling me how many schools have sprung up in villages around the country throughout the decades. God bless you for doing that. Those are the strong institutions, one of them, that help countries go through crisis. I come through my third point, virtues and leadership. History has brought forth numerous exemplary leaders, men and women who have inspired others more by who they were rather than what they did. And there is a common characteristic such leaders have always had, whether they were leading in the religious, political, or any other realm. Yes, Saint Mother Teresa of Calcutta, Mahatma Gandhi, and Nelson Mandela did great things. But it was ultimately the language of their being, who they were and what they stood for, that inspired and motivated millions. Another one of such great leaders, whom I quoted at the beginning, Dag Hammarskjöld, told young people at an address in 1955 as follows. He says, "In politics, the results of the work of the most brilliant mind will ultimately find their value determined by character. Those who are called to be teachers or leaders may profit from intelligence, but can only justify their position by integrity." Any one of you who is involved in education and who is or has been a teacher, or whoever is a parent, we all know how the young see immediately through our own hypocrisy as grown-ups when our words don't match our deeds. This is what Dag Hammarskjöld means. We can only justify our leadership by our position, by integrity. So the quality of leadership relies on the identities, the character of those who are exercising it. This is why I stressed so passionately to you Ugandans that staying faithful to your unique identity is so vital. Please forgive me if in coming to my conclusion I share another quote from this same person, because it is so powerful in its naked truth as it is shattering. He says, "It is said that our time is the age of the decisive fight between freedom and tyranny. It is true that such a fight is going on, but it has always been fought, and I don't believe that I could justifiably be called a pessimist for expressing my belief that this fight will never be over. It will go on, generation after generation, as long as human beings are human beings." And he continues, "Furthermore, this is basically not a struggle between political systems and ideologies, but a struggle within the hearts of men, including our own. There is a Swedish proverb which says that it is always easy to agree on fighting the devil when you have him painted on the wall. But we can never forget that the real devil may also be within ourselves, and all the more dangerous for not being recognized." Das da kammerskjut. You see, this is why Nehemiah devoted so much effort to not only building the walls and gates, but also turning his people back to God and his covenant with them. He did not devote a lot of attention to painting the devil on the wall. Instead, Nehemiah publicly exposed how the people had sinned against God and called them back to faithful adherence to the covenant, to a virtuous life that he called them to live, and he did that through his words, his deeds, and above all, his experience lived. In conclusion, when Nehemiah started rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem, he also had his detractors, especially from within his own community, some of whom had profited from the torn down walls, the occupation, and the unfaithfulness to God and his covenant. But as we have seen before, being dedicated to the single purpose of the welfare of his people, he persisted even when it became clear that his life was in danger. Nehemiah continued building until Jerusalem's walls and gates were restored in 52 days. And he had set his people back on the path of obeying their God. Thus, we too can restore and strengthen our families, our communities, and our nations in that order by ourselves living the virtues, focusing our educational endeavors on teaching those virtues, and firmly rooting our leadership in the daily pursuit of these virtues and in staying faithful to our identity. And here, all comes together for us today as we join for the National Prayer Breakfast to thank God for his wondrous creation, much of which I've been able to witness these days, and to dedicate Uganda, its people and its leaders, to the Word made flesh, Christ the Redeemer. And I would like to finish with a quote from an Austrian writer who says, "He who trusts himself is lost. He who trusts in God can do all things." May God bless you, and may he keep you. May God bless the leaders of this country. And as I have been taught by my Ugandan friends, I would like to close with this beautiful greeting. God is good all the time. All the time. God is good. Amen. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor. Let's put our hands together to appreciate him for this powerful message from Austria. Thank you so much.